Welcome to my rundown on how I feel about the 10 Star Trek movies. A lot of people don't like Star Trek the motion picture, largely because of its slow pace and its reliance on now obsolete special effects to carry the picture. I, however, really like this movie. I admit that much of it is due mainly to my personal taste, and that I don't mind movies that move at this slow of a pace. But the scope of this movie is epic, the concepts behind it are deep, and it's brought out by some pretty stunning visuals and Jerry Goldsmith's amazing soundtrack. And in all this, they managed to introduce two intriguing new characters. Still, despite how much I like this movie, I am glad that this film franchise did not follow in this vein and approach the next movie completely differently. The Wrath of Khan is not only my favorite Star Trek movie, but it is one of my favorite movies of all time. I could go on and on about how this movie gets it right on every level. It is masterfully written, and the director Nicholas Meyer is an absolute genius. Khan is one of the most compelling movie villains of all times, and the regular cast is so comfortable in their parts that it is all natural. Plus, Spock's death at the end is the most beautiful death scene I've ever witnessed in a movie, and I have to admit, I tear up every time I see it. This is as close as you can come to a perfect movie. I would even go as far as to say this is the movie that saved Star Trek. It is ironic how the Star Trek movie with the lowest budget, a Paisley $11 million compared to the motion picture's $45 million, turned out to be the best movie of all. The Search for Spock is a solid film, though I wouldn't say it's a very memorable film in its own right. It is part of a trilogy with the preceding movie and the Voyage Home, and it works very well in the trilogy, but it is overshadowed by the two movies surrounding it. I like how the movie produces a philosophical counterpoint to the attitudes seen towards Project Genesis in The Wrath of Khan. We also have this movie to thank for introducing Klingon culture as we know it today, as well as the Klingon language. There are also a good number of exciting scenes in this movie, but somehow it doesn't gel together into a great movie. It is a good and solid movie, but not quite great. The most popular Star Trek film, The Voyage Home, is a well-conceived, well-written movie that is second only to Wrath of Khan in my opinion. It is the funniest Star Trek movie by far, largely because of its out-of-place setting of the Enterprise crew in 1980s San Francisco. Now, usually time travel plots irritate me because they almost always lead to gaping plot holes, but somehow this movie manages to completely avoid that. This film is a joy and a pleasure to watch, and it would be my favorite Star Trek film if it weren't for The Wrath of Khan. Star Trek V is the most universally hated movie, and I have to agree that it is my least favorite. However, I do not hate The Final Frontier. It has some pretty intriguing concept behind it, and has a number of good scenes, particularly the camping scenes at the beginning and the end, and the scene where McCoy is forced to relive the death of his father. I also find Spock to be a very interesting character who had many possibilities. However, this movie suffered from a number of problems, some of which were a result of poor thinking, and others which were just due to bad timing or bad luck. This movie tries very hard to be funny, but with very few exceptions, the jokes fall flat. There are also plot holes fly enough to fly a space cruiser through. Most noticeably how Spock knows how to get to Shakari, how he knows he can make it through the Great Barrier. A demigod just happens to be on the planet they can find, and there is no explanation of what the demigod is and what, if any, role he had in directing Cyborg to the planet. The good elements of this movie are buried under its numerous flaws. It had a lot of potential, but ended up falling flat. Calling this movie fair would be very, very generous. However, I would be dishonest if I failed to mention that due to Jerry Goldsmith's return, this movie has one of the most beautiful scores of the movie franchise. The Undiscovered Country is a light year ahead of The Final Frontier, but not quite up to the standard set by The Wrath of Khan and Voyage Home. This is the first Star Trek movie to be an allegory to contemporary world events, in this case, the ending of the Cold War. Nicholas Meyer returns to direct, and this movie is well-paced, definitely the fastest of the six. This movie is well-made and exciting, and a good send-off for the original crew. It holds itself together well and comes to a climactic conclusion. I would call this a very good film. I'm not sure if it's quite a great film, but it is very good. Unfortunately, Generations takes a dive for the worse. Despite liking the Next Generation crew, I don't think they really get a chance to shine in this movie. Also, this movie's villain is largely undeveloped, and you don't really get to know him well enough to really fear or even pity him. Granted, there was a lot on the plate of the writers at the time, especially the fact that Kirk and Picard had to be made to meet somehow, despite 78 years separating them. This necessitates a time travel plot, and unlike the Voyage Home, it does fall victim to the plot holes usually seen in these plots. While Picard has a few emotionally poignant moments in the Nexus, the idea of the Nexus isn't very well thought out and doesn't make much sense. Also, Kirk's death scene is very unsatisfying and does not do the character justice. I would have to say that this movie is my second least favorite after The Final Frontier. Star Trek First Contact was a lot better than Generations, and I would even call it a good film. Though it has numerous flaws, it has enough exciting action and a fairly compelling story about Zefram Cochrane's warp flight that it just about makes up for it. However, this movie is a time travel film, and like Generations, it ensnares itself in the plot hole problem the former had, the foremost among them being that if the Borg had the ability to send spheres back in time to stimulate planets in a more primitive phase, why don't they do that all the time? Also, I have heard arguments that having a Borg queen undermines the Borg as an enemy, and I am inclined to agree, even if she is an interesting character. But the whole excitement of going back in time to witness and take part in historic events are intriguing, and learning the true nature of Zefram Cochrane is a compelling part of the story. The movie is good, not great, and I think it is a little overrated. However, it does have an amazing soundtrack. Star Trek Insurrection is probably the movie least liked by the Next Generation fans, and it has also been criticized for being too much like an episode and less like a movie, and I'm inclined to agree to that point. The stakes are not big enough in this movie, and the characters and the universe as a whole are not changed by the events of this movie. This movie had the largest budget to date, and there are spectacular sets and ships in this movie, but they are undermined by the smallness of its scope. Kind of like designing a state-of-the-art race car only to use it to take your grandmother to the grocery store. That being said, you can tell that this movie was largely done for fun, and the cast members were having the time of their life doing it. This movie was more of a treat for the Next Generation fans, who like seeing their favorite characters, but didn't really add anything to Next Generation or Star Trek as a whole. In my opinion, Nemesis is by far the best of the 4 Next Generation movies, and I know I'm going to get a lot of hate comments from TNG fans about this. Not only is this the best TNG movie, but I think it's the most underrated Star Trek movie. Star Trek movies generally fall into 2 categories: movies that are very good and are treated as such, like The Wrath of Khan or Undiscovered Country. The other category is movies that weren't that great and are seen as such, like The Final Frontier. Nemesis, however, is a very good movie, unfairly labeled as a bad movie. I think this is mainly due to one reason: Data dies. Admittedly, Data's death scene is not very good, though I still think it's better than Kirk's on Generations. Also, this movie has a much darker tone than any of the movies preceding it. However, I think it suits it. Shinzon, our villain, is in my opinion the second most compelling Trek movie villain after Khan himself. The fact that he is Picard's clone opens up the whole psychological angle about identity, nature versus nurture, the choices we make, and the paths that we choose that make us who we are, and the question of who we are. Data's character is done more of a service in this movie than the last 3 combined, in which he was mainly used for laughs. I still don't like his death scene, and I wish the writers could have found a different way to do it if it was true that Data was destined to die. So this is the order in which I would rank the Star Trek movies that have been released so far. Don't get me wrong, even though I am critical of many elements of the movies, I still fundamentally like all 10 of them and find pleasure watching any of them. I know most people are going to disagree with at least one part of my rankings, probably more, but I know I have my reasons for these rankings, and though a lot of it is personal taste, much of my judgment is based on subjective reasoning. Thank you for watching.